I'm Doug Stanley, and this is Wilder Yet.
I've been conditioned for the last 20 years to do things like this. Nobody's going to beat me.
So, Travis, how have you been? It's been some years since I've seen you, but it's good to see you again.
It has been a few years. I'm loving life, man. Just out here, like continuously taking the path that seems the most interesting. And last time we were seeing each other a lot. We were up in the Bering Sea. Since then, I've been traveling all over the place and got myself into all sorts of different ventures. And uh, it's been a wacky life, man. Like, I can't lie. It's been a pretty crazy, pretty crazy existence. So I'm enjoying it.
Let's talk about being together aboard the North American. Tell me about that boat. What was that boat?
Man, I'll tell you, I've worked on quite a few boats at this point, and the North American has, out of 20 years, I've been doing it about 20 years almost now at this point. It's been about that long. The North American, man, that was probably the most fun I've ever had, crab fishing. Um, it was a great boat to begin with, right? It was a good platform. The boat was clean. It was, everything about it was nice, functional, but it was like really, it was kind of the crew. I mean, just as well, the crew is what makes it. It, it. You could be in the worst situations in the world. I mean, you were doing stuff when we were first met. You had just come back from doing a whole bunch of stuff, in war zones and stuff. And it's kind of like that, where the camaraderie, like you could be under fire, you could be on the verge of death, everything's crazy, nothing's working, it's the worst situation in the world, but you can still find time to laugh about it. You can joke with each other, you can really, get down to it, get it done. And I love the North American that way. We had a good crew. um but out of all the boats that you've been on too, you know, did you have a good time on the North American? Because I know I did.
I did. Part of it was kind of fun. It was having you there. You and I had met in the very first years of Deadliest Catch, and then you were always kind of this adventure kid that was running around and wanted to talk story and be close to the crew because they were more like your people in a lot of ways than some of the fishermen. And I remember when I got on the North American with you, it was during a specific time in your life that was you were bringing parkour onto the vessel. And how could you ever forget that? I mean, who would do parkour on a ship at sea? And I remember this one incident where I was up on the shelter wall or the shelter roof. I think they have a roof there, right? And you and I were standing up there, and you timed the vessel and just ran down this roof, leaped off the second story of the ship, and as the stern of the boat was falling, you landed softly and kept, running away. And I couldn't, you think now that you're an older man, an older guy, you think about how brazen that really is. You're 200 nautical miles away from the nearest port. We're out there and you're just hucking your body like we're, just around the corner from the hospital. But it wasn't the case. And everybody's trying, we all loved you, but man, it was like, wow, everybody's livelihoods were on the line at that moment.
Oh yeah. You know, the bold, young and bold, right? Like, man, it was always my goal to do a backflip off there too. I never did that, but that's probably a good thing. Um, you know, that was a lot of fun, doing those things because throughout my entire life, I've always found that, constantly training, right, constantly working on progression, like safe progression. Um, back in those years, was a little more bold with it, but my knees also worked great. So, man, you know, I think climbing on the stack, like climbing over the pots, timing the waves of the boats, to be able to jump off of things like that. You're doing superhuman things, and that's what I loved about that. Bringing that parkour flair. I was doing that on land, and it's one thing to be doing that in a gymnasium, where you got pads and stuff, or you're out, trying to do that, in an obstacle course sort of setting. But man, as soon as that environment starts moving, it's a different ball game. And to me, that has always been the best training grounds for virtually anything. Like you said earlier about finding your people with that. Yeah, I love fishing, and I got a lot of friends that are been fishermen all their lives, and fishermen can be very diverse, very dynamic individuals, but it does seem that a lot of fishermen get stuck doing just a certain thing. And yeah, I've always been pretty dynamic myself. You guys, the crew, the camera crew, production crew, you guys were coming in from a different world, and that was a world that I really enjoyed. So I loved hearing your guys' stories. They're super inspirational to me, and they always have been. And so when you guys were on board, that made a big difference for me, because it also gave me somebody to talk to who enjoyed some of these things that. You try and talk to a fisherman about parkour, and they're looking at you like, "What the fuck did you just say? And what are you doing?" And they don't quite understand, what it means to do those things, and why those things are being done. um, so man, I think that was great that you guys were on board. You remember, man, do you remember how it was when we would be stacking gear, right? Or not stacking gear, but we'd be setting gear, and we would have, the huge stack of gear on the back of the boat, maybe four stacks high, and we have to bait the pots as we send them over. So, I had the title Stack Monkey, right? Because that's, just wiggling around on all the pots. But back then I didn't really think about it. And then, as I got older and I came back to land, and I'm talking to people on land, and they're like, they don't understand what the fuck's going on. You're hanging over the side of a boat by one hand. I had to wrap my arm around. I mean, you were up there with me. You had a camera. You had one arm like this. You had a camera. I had one arm like this with a bait sack, and we're trying to, bait these pots, man, and in rough seas, and you're hanging over the side of the boat. You're not even over the boat. We're over the side of the boat. Waves are coming up, hitting our feet. All it would take is one little slip up. I mean, say what you want about the free solo climbers and all that stuff. Absolutely, tough stuff. Try, when your environment is rocking and rolling, and you're in, 60 knot winds, and you're in some pretty rough seas, you know, um, we did some pretty crazy shit. You're hanging on. And that's where, like, the parkour stuff, man, that's where that all really came into play. Because, like, if you don't do that, man, all it takes is one slip, one grab, and you don't have it. Or say you grab that web and the webbing breaks. I mean, that stuff happens all the time. And if you do it at the wrong time, you're toast. You're done. And you ain't coming back. Like when you hit that water, on those stormy days, there's no coming back. So, it was like, the parkour stuff, the constant training, man, I caught a lot of shit for that stuff too. A lot of the fishermen, they were like, what the fuck is this guy doing? And
You remember Hiram? Hiram was on the Maverick. Do you remember Hiram Johnson?
yeah,
Of all the guys that I've been on the boats with, Hiram had this oneness with the movement of the boat that I never really saw. Your movement was youthful and energetic. He was the old man of the sea in a manner that he had balance, like it was uncanny. Like whenever you're stacking when you stack the pots on the vessel and you get three high, by the time that happens, it's very, down on the deck itself, it's going back and forth. But what's really happening is that this arc is happening in the sky. that you're on this thing that's arcing over the top because you're 3 stories high. And it's often what it's like in the wheelhouse as well. People think that's the cushy job, but the fact is you're throwing a much bigger arc every time the boat turns. And but Hiram, one time we had three high stacked on the boat, and he got out on this one of the parts of that were going straight towards the bow, the steel that was going, on the pots. He's standing on the stack with both feet like a skateboard or a surfboard, and he stood there and he did this incredibly, like it was like 5 minutes, and I was just blown away because I obviously had a bit of balance as well too, but not like that. Hiram had it, and he was also that guy that when I talk about, people ask me about stories people told me, or I would refer back to Hiram and to this. We were in the forepeak of the Maverick, and it was really drunk and disorderly out there. It was just the sea was slamming us around, and he was sitting in one of those expanding little chairs you bring to the football game, whatever, with the metal legs. And he was sliding on the greasy floor back and forth. And I'm doing this interview with him, and the energy in the room and everything's swinging. And he's telling me the story of Terry and Chris Rosendahl. And he and Terry and Chris were all boys in Astoria, Oregon, playing baseball, really, right when the masts of the boats would come in the harbor and go past the baseball field. You got the picture in your eye. And they'd go down and they'd, meet these guys that were coming back from the heyday of crabbing, young men with $250,000 in their pocket and a brand new Corvette. And these guys were so impressed that the three of them went to the Bering Sea. And what had happened is they were on different they were on ships together, and they were on different ships. But by the time I tied in with Hiram, he was 30 years in or so to crab the fishery. And my very first trip out there on the Sea Star with Larry Hendricks, we were sister ships with the Shaman, with Dan on the Shaman. And so we just happened to be right there when Terry Rosendahl went overboard. And it was the very first pilot episode, or pilot, it's called America's Most Dangerous Job Crab Fisherman, or whatever the first title was of the 3-hour we did first. And I happened to be there, at the end of Terry Rosendahl's life. I filmed him being pulled back out of the ocean. I filmed the copters coming in and taking him away. And so Hiram didn't know this. And so I'm sitting in this interview, and I go, Terry Rosendahl? And he said, like, yeah, my brother, and I'm like, I was the person that was there at the time. And Hiram goes into this, I don't know if you remember him, but he got like really sketchy, in his mind. And he took that in, that I was there when Terry was dead. And he told me this story about how they all grew up, how the dangers they faced. And he left the whole thing off with this, talking about how Chris and he were on a ship in the ice that was rolling really slowly because the stack was on and everything was icy and it was rolling real slowly, right? And he said that he ended up sliding across the boat on the deck, getting hit and getting up on the working rail on his back. As the boat rolled down, his feet went up in the air, and he slid, as the bow went up, he slid the entire length of the boat on the icy rail with his feet up in the air. And Chris Rosendahl had grabbed his feet and pulled him back over, but he literally transported himself all the way across the whole boat. And at the last second, Chris kept him from going overboard. And then, of course, Hiram also related how he was on the vessel when Chris lost his life. So, the two brothers went up there. They both lost their life. But, in the early days of the crab fishery, when we met, there were 400 vessels going to sea. And now I think there's like 38. And I just remember coming up and being in the land of the working man. And, I had a hotel room that was at the sports bar, and I could look out and see the harbor full of fishermen working at 4 a.m. like it was 9 o'clock in the morning. And I just remember looking at my watch and thinking, this is a land that does not go by the clock, man.
It doesn't. I mean, you remember that time? There was an electricity. It was like showing up to Dutch Harbor for a king crab season. Back then, man, when there was 400 boats going, that was the craziest time. I've never felt anything like that before. Going, showing up to a rock in the middle of nowhere. You're at the end of the Aleutian Islands, the Aleutian chain. You're in between the biggest ocean in the world and the most notoriously dangerous sea in the world. And it's a frozen rock. There barely even any trees there. There's really not any. And it's just a bunch of people out there getting ready to go catch some animals. They're out there trying to make all their money in one shot, and they're trying to stay alive. Like, it was team versus team. I mean, like you said there, the guys, man, they're most of the guys I've been working with over the years, they're gone. A lot of them have died, and the ones that haven't died, they're injured beyond repair. Um, and and that's something that, that land, that rock is going to hold a special place forever, in my heart, like that, because there's nowhere else like that anybody can go to. Like, if you had the sheer willpower, the strength and tenacity and determination to do it, you could make something up. You could do it. You could make it. You could claw your way to the top if you wanted to. Um, Things are a lot different now, with 30 boats, fishing. But the lawlessness of it, man, the first time I ever saw a bar fight, man, like, I remember, watching, I've been in a ton of them up there. The first time that I was on a boat, and the guys were giving me shit, like, a lot, and I mean, I was moving slow or whatever, and this guy comes up. I back talked to him or something, said some dumb stuff to him, and he hauls off and he slapped me across the face. And that was on the Erla N, which was on that
Yeah,
first
yeah.
um, the first program.
Bing's boat. Yeah, Bing's boat. Yeah.
And I went up to Bing, and I was like, Bing, this guy just fucking hit me, man. And this I ran up to the wheelhouse. And he looks at me and he goes, well, hit him back, and then shut the door on me. and I'm standing there in the middle of the Bering Sea, and I'm looking around, and I don't know anybody here. I'm hundreds and hundreds of miles. I'm days away from anything. And I'm stuck on this boat with these guys with straight pirates. It was straight pirates. And that was the realization that this is a real man's place. This ain't no joke.
It's the land of the working man for sure, Alaska. I've had the opportunity to work with crab fishermen, lobster fishermen, herring fishermen, salmon fishermen. I've worked all over the fisheries. Plus, I've worked with bridge painters, oilmen, rodeo cowboys, which is kind of an exciting life. On and on and on to the land of the working man is kind of my fate in life, to be stuck with working men. And let me tell you, they all assume that they're the hardest working people. But let me also tell you, there is nobody in the world like the Bering Sea crab fishermen. When it's 18 hours into a shift, you've only had 3 hours of sleep the night before, or whatever time it was you got to sleep. And every time you finish a string, you're collapsing in a heap in the forepeak. And then you're getting up and the captain's going, we got 2 more strings to pull. And we know we're going past the 24, maybe 28-hour mark to get all those pots up, stacked, or whatever they have to be. What a phenomenal amount of work. And when you come out of that, you've got to feel like you really did something.
It makes coming back to the mainland pretty tough, huh?
It does. I remember this scene. We pulled into St. George Harbor, right? And you know how when you pull into St. George coming out of the rough sea, it's so narrow, the entrance, and you have to pull straight in, make a right-hand turn. And like, it's sketchy as hell, and it's windy, and it's like -22 or something. And I remember the captain, like, we're pulling in, and I'm with the captain in the wheelhouse, and guys had been sleeping because we were running, and he goes, go get the guys up, tell them to tie up, the boat to the dock. And I run up, "Hey, captain says get up, man." And all the guys get up, like you guys always do, just immediately ready to go, firemen getting ready to hop on the pole. And I remember some of the crab fishermen on that trip did not put enough clothing on. They thought it was just going to be a quick tie-up job, and the wind started shoving the boat around. And like 40 minutes later, they're out in -22 in like no clothing, in like their sweatpants that they just got out of their warm bed in, and they were just like dying, but stuck to the task. No way to leave the boat in that condition. Captain screaming through the hailer, and it's like, I look at moments like that and I just think of like, I've never seen men work like that ever on earth. That's incredible.
Right? The camaraderie, like that teamwork, when you get that good team together, man, it's not a job. I think that's a big part of it. It's not it's not a job as much as it's the life that you're living at that time. When you're on that boat, you can't just walk away. If you walked outside, I mean, I've been that guy in the sweatpants before. I've thought that I was just going to run outside real quick, and next thing you know, hey man, there's some shit going on and you can't go anywhere. You have to be out here working on this. And the thought never it can't cross your mind. If that thought comes into your mind, that feeling that you get with it, it's like you really did. Yeah, you did something really, really big. You pushed it beyond where everyone else they quit long ago, and you're out there, it's pouring down rain, or it's like, those were always the worst, but also the best was, when you go outside. I don't know if you remember when we go out and we're setting gear, we have to haul gear, something's going on, and the weather's just nasty, blowing sideways, icy spray. So as soon as that water hits you, you're looking at it, and it's water as it's going through the air, but the moment that it touches you, it turns to slush. You get those the sparkles in the light, and the sodium lights are shining down, and the waves just crash into the boat, and it's like a 30-foot wave vaporizes in front of you and turns into this fine mist. And as that fine mist comes, it's sparkling like diamonds, and the moment it touches you, it freezes. And uh and and as all of that's happening, the energy from all that, what I always got was that's what would always pull me into the space of let's get it done. Like, this is so hard right now, this is so intense, that it's time to turn it up. Now is the time. When I was working on the Erla End, one of the guys, when I first started fishing, he always said, a full share never uses 100%. Full share, uses maybe 80%. You always save that 20% reserve. And it took a while before I figured out what the hell he meant, because when you're learning, you got to use 100%. Um, but after a while, you start to realize what that means and why he said that. And that stuck with me pretty much for life. I mean, I think it will. It translates to everything, go 80% because you need to save that 20 when the shit gets real.
They also can't understand like what the forces are that are upon you. For somebody to say, yeah, we were at sea and we had 90-mile-an-hour winds, and they just don't understand how it affects the vessel. When a vessel's going up a wave and it's taking it somewhat on the side, and you come to that top, and that 90-mile-an-hour wind is trying to prevent you from moving forward, and the ocean catches up with you under the keel, and you feel those incredible forces of how things could just tear apart in the wind. It's just stopping you when there's currents and waves, and like, or shoving you someplace when you're trying to park a boat between two other boats at a dock, and like how crazy it gets. Something you said though a little earlier, you said, it's like a team sport. It's a team sport. And that's true when you're on a boat that acts like a team. And the North American was one of those boats. You and Tarjak, Vingy, and John and Sven and who else did we have there? Oh, the greenhorn, the greenhorn that you made wear the greenhorn hat, right?
Yeah, Debo.
Debo, that's right. I remember being on some other boats that didn't get along as well. And I remember, thinking that this isn't a team sport. What's going on here now is that, one guy said something to one of the other guys. He goes, you're, fucking lazy. And then the whole trip, that guy is echoing that. He's sorting crab. He's going, yeah, fucking lazy. Yeah, he's grinding on it. His teeth are grinding. He's got powder coming out the edges of his mouth. And he just keeps looking at that guy with death in his eyes. And they cross ways 400 times while he's going, fucking lazy? You think I'm lazy? I'm, and it's building, and you can feel that tension. And, I'd be out there on the deck, and when you're shooting and you know that only 13 of these hours is ever going to air, and we're going to be shooting 20,000 hours because we've got all those fixed cameras on all the boats that are running 24/7. But, this camera in my hand will shoot 300 hours of video on this trip. There's times when you're in those situations and you're filming, and you get really uncomfortable because the depth of the anger, the depth of that moment is so deep. And anytime that I feel uncomfortable shooting, that's when television gold happens. It's when I just I can't believe this is my job right now, to stand here and film this person in this horrid situation in their life. And, when I was on the Maverick, Sean got fired, and he kind of deserved it. The whole time he was talking bad about the captain. Skip Elia. He's doing all this stuff. And we were again in St. George, I believe, and the guys were told not to leave the boat. And I knew Sean was going to leave the boat. So I got up, I crawled out there in the snow and the wind. I kind of made myself a hiding place. I got my camera ready, and sure as heck, there comes Sean, jumping up on the dock, and off he goes to town to drink, right? Snow prints in the foreground, the footprints in the snow, everything perfect, right? The next day, there's an offload, and the captain's pissed because Sean went to town. And during the offload, he pulls Sean in, and they're in the galley, and I'm standing between them, but I'm pinned up against this table, and I got my camera back and forth, and it is fire time, right? They're getting angry, and Sean's like, 1.5 foot taller than Porkchop, and Porkchop just says, Sean, you're fired, man. And after this whole thing, but I'm caught in the middle of their argument, and then Sean looks at him straight in the eyes, and he goes, you done, Captain? He goes, yeah. He goes, good, because I got to get back to work. And he just turns around and runs out and starts going back to work. He just got fired. He's like, don't get in the way of my work, man. I'm working here, okay? But all the things that we saw out there,
that was something, that I've always imagined that you had the most incredible time with, being able to be in that position where you're there, you're a part of it, you are a part of the team, but your position in that is to identify that tension, right? And to place yourself in the position where those powder kegs could potentially, create pivot points, or create these moments that are going to really tell the story, because ultimately that's what the whole thing is telling these stories. And being a storyteller, you have to be aware of the characters, you have to be aware of the character development, and there's no script. That's the thing. These are just crazy ass people, legit crazy people that you've put yourself in the middle. And that, to me, the people, to me, the people have always made it interesting. The work is very hard, and the work is rewarding and challenging and all of that stuff. But what has always made it for me was the incredibly dynamic people that do the job. You have the nicest people in the world, and you have some of the craziest, most violent people out there, and you put them in this small space, in this tiny little 3-bedroom apartment that's floating in the middle of the sea, where you have all these wildly dynamic personalities that just clash. And I've always felt like no matter what boat I'm on, no matter what fishery I'm doing, I always feel like I'm in the middle of a sitcom. I can sit in the galley and I can watch guys come and go, and there's always some drama happening, right? There's always some rah, fucking fuck, rah, 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 rah. And as a fisherman, I have to play that role, where, I kind of, you have to blend in, you have to be with them, you have to be a diplomat, you have, and for me, I always tried to be the guy that would bridge those connections between the men that didn't understand each other. They couldn't communicate. So I would try and bridge those. And ultimately that led me to becoming friends with everybody. And I'm a pretty friendly guy usually, so I didn't mind that. But where your position was in that, you got to know all the little inner workings. You got to be there, without knowing what the outcome was ever going to be. So had to have been extremely like exciting for you to be in those moments where some crazy shit's going on, or like you see the story developing where none of the other guys see that, even the people involved don't see this developing, but you've been watching it for weeks, maybe even months. It started in shipyard, some guy said something, right, and next thing you know, it just keeps rolling and rolling. In your position, you get to watch all of it. You get to, um, just observe the craziness and capture it and try and tell the story in the best way. And I've always admired that with you specifically, but all the guys, the storytelling has you guys know what it takes to tell that story, create that. Um, uh,
But ultimately, I always say the truth is the hardest story to tell. It truly is. And I have this 3-day rule, right? My 3-day rule is that nobody in front of the camera can pretend they're somebody other than themselves for more than 3 days. I was on this shoot with the Marine Salvagers, and I was down in Chile, and I literally arrived on the shoot. They had 2 ships and some barges, and they were raising a 600-foot boat down there. I showed up and walked into the galley during lunchtime. Not a single man on that boat had any idea that there was a film crew about ready to arrive and make a television show out of them. So my introduction to all of them was, "Hi, I'm the film guy." And they're like, "What?" And like nobody knew anything. And so that wasn't my fault. I got to say outright, okay? The truth is the hardest story to tell. It was somebody else's fault. After the Bering Sea, I had an opportunity to chase real-time shipwrecks around the world for over 2 years. So I ended up with sinking ships in Chile, with ships on fire off the Canary Islands. We pulled the Savannah Ray off of Long Island, off of Kodiak, a crabber that had gone aground there. Got this amazing shot. Dan Magone from Magone Salvage, right? So I got a shot of Dan. I've got this shot where we finally pull the boat off the reef. Dan's on board. The boat hooks under tow, rolls over, and Dan runs the boat around and ends up standing by the screw without even a drop of water on him. Calmly, I've got a wireless mic on him, and he calmly goes,
"Yeah, you want to swing by for a pickup?"
"Yeah, Roger." It's just this crazy moment. But right, so we're in the North American, which is built by Marco, and it's this legendary type of boat. And Stin is telling me in the wheelhouse, he goes, when it gets really stormy out there, the best thing you can do is just shut the boat off and go watch television. So I remember that night when I think you guys were in there watching Perfect Storm while we were going through these waves. Now, I was so fascinated by what the ocean was doing that night that I kept stepping out on deck, but it kept getting more fierce. But just the boat was in dead drift. It was just going up these waves like not like it's so easy and over the top and down. It's just like making little water sounds. But we were in these huge seas, the biggest I probably ever saw. But that storm continued, the wind direction changed. And do you remember by the time we woke up the next morning, the entire deck of the boat had been completely ripped off the vessel, right? That was quite a storm, man. It was something.
I've never seen anything like that. I walked out that night, man. Was it was very intense, but at the same time there was that calmness because of how the boat was just drifting through it. The way it seemed like the wind and the waves were just in harmony with the boat. Um, but at the same time, like as we were all huddled in there inside the little, inside the galley, watching a movie, eating ice cream, just being, you know, just some goofballs. While that was going on inside, just an absolute mayhem ravaging was happening outside those doors. And I remember walking out that morning and I went to step out onto deck and there were the boards, the whole deck was stacked. Do you remember that? It was like somebody had gone there and individually stacked everything up. It was insane. Like Mother Nature, came in and said, "Nope, we're just gonna wipe this up and we're gonna put it over here." And all of that going on while we're inside. Yeah, it was crazy. Sten's he's an interesting dude. I've worked for a lot of people and a lot of captains out there, and nobody's been like Sten. The one thing with him is, he seemed to really care about the crew and he seemed to really care about the teamwork. Um, and he was always, one of the best guys there. Um, he definitely has his quirks or has his quirks and all that stuff. But from a like when I think about it, um, like he definitely isn't the most hardcore captain, right? Like he goes and, hey, what do we do in a bad storm? Yeah, let's just drift into it and go watch a movie. No one else would say that. That's such a Sten thing to do. Like let's go watch a movie and eat some ice cream, guys. Let's go. No one else would do that. There's a lot of things that he wouldn't do, but there was also some things that I look at from a track record. Like there was never any injuries. We never had any serious injuries on our boat. Other than minor cuts and bruises, there was never anything bad. We um, we always managed to at least get it done. We weren't always the fastest, that's for sure. That was something that Sten and I would always butt heads on. I was his mate for a long time, and man, trying to get him motivated to get out and let's go.
Unless you're going to the bar.
Right, unless we're going to the bar, man. But I will say some of those times, we got to go to some incredible places around Alaska, just because he wanted to go check out a bar. And we have this multi-million-dollar vessel with, you know, a month's worth of fuel. We could go anywhere in the world and we're just gonna take our time. We're gonna cruise up the inside passage here. We're gonna stop at every little village. We're gonna go drinking. Let's go jump in. Let's see what's happening at the bar at the village over here. You'd
Yeah.
never be able to do that stuff in any other like realm of life. There's not You need specialized equipment. It costs an arm and a leg. I mean, it's absolutely just not feasible to do that, but we did it. And that was, thanks to Sten and just wanting to have a good time and go drinking. We got to have some fun with it. But then when it came time to work, that was where we would butt heads a lot. And you know, uh, when I was working on the Erla N, you know that boat really well. That boat was a Highliner, and Bing was an absolute monster.
He was a monster.
There's guys that I worked a long time for, like he was my longtime captain. and I was his greenhorn. And knowing what I know now, man, I understand why nobody could stand it, why he was always doing that. But I never I learned so much. It was tough love, tough lessons, but I learned so much being a highliner on a highliner boat. Every little bit about it. Our pot tie lengths had to be exact. Every single knot. If your knot wasn't exactly correct, you'd get hell, right? Um, there was no leniency on that boat unless you earned it. And going from that to all of a sudden now you're on this boat where, hey guys, you know, we've done a good job today. Let's go ahead and, take a break because the weather is real shitty. So let's take a break for a little bit. It was very welcomed, that was nice. But when it came time to work, man, getting them out of the bar sometimes was something.
Yeah. Do you remember the incident I had at the end of my trip on the North American where we were tied up against the boards at the processor, the cannery, and it was time to move our boat into position to be unloaded, but I couldn't wake Sten up. And remember that I couldn't wake him up, and I was the only person on the boat, and all the cannery people were coming after me saying, "Move your boat, move your boat." And I was placed in this position. John was gone. You weren't on the boat or something. And I ended up having to move the boat. Oh man, Sten was so fucking pissed at me.
Oh, man. But that was the thing. I mean, there was one day, another time that happened where we were late to our offload. We were out drinking, whatever, and he got completely just smashed. Wouldn't wake up in the morning, so we decide, okay, well, what can we do? Trying to get him up, and we're like, fuck it, we're gonna go over whatever. But he gets up when we're coming into the dock to offload. Like, I'll never forget this because I got so mad that day. We're coming into offload after the cannery's been yelling at us. We got boats waiting behind us. The schedule's tight. The schedule's real tight. And he gets on the loudhailer and he starts singing show tunes as all of the cannery workers are standing there at the dock. They've been waiting for us for 45 minutes. We're late. And he is just up there. He's still drunk and he's just singing some show tunes over the loudhailer. Man, I ran downstairs and I punched that loudhailer, so just ripped it right off the wall. And it's like, man, it's so embarrassing.
Speaking of offloading, I think we're going to bring this call to an end. I think you and I should get together and do another episode soon, and maybe we'll talk about the event we produced together that where we had Snoop Dogg up in Bellingham, Washington, right?
Yeah, that's the other life.
Yeah, the other chapter. All right. Well, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for coming today.
Okay, awesome, man. Good talking to you, Doug. We'll talk to you later.
Push the subscribe button.